It was somewhere at the back of beyond. Maybury would have found it difficult to be more precise. The most that could be said was that Maybury was presumably at the outer edge of the immense West Midlands conurbation. He seemed to have been driving for hours since he left the works, going round and round in large or small circles, asking the way and being unable to understand the answers, all the time seemingly more off course than ever. Maybury looked at his watch. He had been driving for hours. By rights, he should have been more than halfway home, considerably more. Even the dashboard light seemed feebler than usual, but by it, Maybury saw that he would soon be out of petrol. Dark though it was, Maybury was aware of many trees, mountainous and opaque. It was not, however, that there were no houses. Houses there must be, because on both sides of the road there were gates, broad single gates commonly painted white. And even where there were no gates, there were dim entrances. Almost identical roads seemed to curve away in all directions. It was quiet. The houses were set too far back from the road for the noise of the television sets to be heard. Pedestrians are now so rare in such a district at any hour, but now there was no traffic either. Maybury was disturbed by the silence. By the light of the occasional street lamp, Maybury could see that sometimes there was an owner who had his hedge trimmed and sometimes an owner who did not. It would be futile to walk any further along the road. There were Angela and their son Tony awaiting him, and he must resume the fight to rejoin them. Something shot out at him from the left. He had disturbed a cat. The first he knew of it was its claws, or conceivably its teeth, sunk into his left leg. There had been no question of ingratiation or cuddling up. Maybury kicked out furiously. He must have kicked the cat a long way because there was no hint of it, nor had he seen the colour of the cat. He fancied he had seen two flaming eyes, but he was not sure even of that. There had been no mew, no scream. Maybury faltered. His leg really hurt. It hurt so much that he could not bring himself to touch the limb, even to look at it in the lamplight. He faltered back at the car, and though his leg made difficulties even starting it, set off indecisively down the road along which he had just walked. The road was beginning to straighten out, though the trees remained dense. There were still occasional houses with entries at long and irregular intervals. Lampposts were becoming fewer also, but Maybury saw that one of them bore a hanging sign of some kind. The sign was shaped like a club in a pack of cards and read, "The Hospice. Good fare, some accommodation." Maybury decided almost instantly he was hungry, he was injured, he was lost, he was almost without petrol. He would inquire for dinner and, if he could telephone home, might even stay the night, though he had neither pyjamas nor electric razor. The gate, made of iron, and more suited, Maybury would have thought, to a farmyard bullpen, was nonetheless wide open. Maybury drove through. Maybury's headlights bounced and lurched disconcertingly as he proceeded, but suddenly the drive, which had run quite straight, swerved, and there, on Maybury's left, was the hospice. Maybury locked the car and pushed at the door of the house. It was a solid Victorian door, and it did not respond to Maybury's pressure. Maybury was discouraged by the need to ring, but he rang. He noticed there was a second bell lower down marked night. Surely it could not yet be night. He did not much care for standing alone in the strange place under bright floodlight, uncertain of what was going to happen. But quite soon the door was opened by a lad with curly fair hair and an untroubled face. He was wearing a white jacket and smiling helpfully. "Dinner?" "Yes, sir. I fear we have just started, but I'm sure we can fit you in." To Maybury the words brought back the seaside boarding houses where he had been taken for holidays when a boy. Inside, it was not at all like the boarding houses of Maybury's youth. Maybury happened to know exactly what it was like. The effect was that produced by the efforts of an expensive and rather old-fashioned furniture emporium. There were hangings on the walls, and every chair and sofa was upholstered. The lad held open the door marked "Gentleman" in script, but then followed Maybury in, which Maybury had not particularly expected, but the lad did not proceed to fuss tiresomely with soap and towel as happens sometimes in very expensive hotels. All he did was stand about. Maybury reflected that doubtless he was concerned to prevent all possible delay, dinner having started. The dining room struck Maybury, immediately he entered, as rather too hot. The room was lined with hangings similar to those in the hall, but apparently even heavier. Possible noise reduction was among the objects. The ceiling of the room had been brought down in the modern manner, and any windows had disappeared behind swathes. It is true that knives and forks make a clatter, but there appeared to be no other immediate necessity for costly noise abatement, as the diners were all extremely quiet, which at first seemed the more unexpected in that most of them were seated fairly closely packed at a long single table running down the central axis of the room. On each side of the room were 4 smaller tables, set endways against the walls, every table set for a single person, even though big enough to accommodate 4, and at one of these, Maybury was settled by the handsome lad in the white jacket. Immediately, soup arrived. There was an enormous quantity of soup, in what Maybury realised was an unusually deep and wide plate. Round much of its wide rim was inscribed in large black letters, "The Hospice," rather in the style of a baby's plate. The soup itself was unusually weighty too. It undoubtedly contained eggs as well as pulses, and steps had been taken to add thickening also. Maybury was faintly disconcerted to realise that one of the middle-aged women was standing quietly behind him as he consumed the not inconsiderable number of final spoonfuls. The woman removed his plate with a reassuring smile. The second course was there. As she set it before him, the woman spoke confidentially in his ear of the third course. "It's turkey tonight." Her tone was exactly that in which promise is conveyed to a little boy of his favourite dish. Meanwhile, the second course was a proliferating elaboration of pasta, probably fabricated that morning. Cheese, in fairly large granules, was strewn across the heap from a large porcelain bowl without Maybury being noticeably consulted. "Can I have something to drink? A lager will do." "We have nothing like that, sir." "A pity," said Maybury. The woman's inflections were beginning to bore him, and he was wondering how much the rich food, all palpably fresh and homegrown, and of almost unattainable quality, was about to cost him. He doubted very much whether it would be sensible to think of staying the night at the hospice. "When you have finished your second course, you may have the opportunity of a word with Mr. Faulkner." "Can't you eat any more?" she inquired baldly, no longer addressing Maybury as sir. "Not if I'm to attempt another course," replied Maybury quite equably. "It's very good," said Maybury firmly, "but I've had enough." It was as if the woman were not used to such conduct, but as this was no longer a nursery, she took the plate away. His slab of turkey appeared. It was an enormous pile, steaming slightly and also seeping slightly with a colourless, oily fluid. With it appeared 5 separate varieties of vegetables in separate dishes, and a sauceboat, apparently for him alone, of specially compounded fluid, dark red and turgid. A sizable mound of stuffing completed the repast. The middle-aged woman set it all before him swiftly, but this time silently, with unmistakable reserve. The truth was that Maybury had little appetite left. He gazed around to see how the rest were managing. He had to admit that, as far as he could see, they were one and all eating as if their lives depended on it. Old as well as young, female as well as male, it was as if they had spent a long, unfed day in the hunting field. "Is everything to your liking, Mr. Maybury?" Again he'd be gently taken by surprise. Mr. Faulkner was at his shoulder, a sleek man in the most beautiful dinner jacket, an instantly ameliorative maitre d'hotel. "Perfect, thank you," said Maybury. "But how did you know my name?" "We like to remember the names of all our guests," said Faulkner, smiling. "Yes, but how did you find out my name in the first place?" "We like to think we're proficient at that too, Mr. Maybury." "I am much impressed," said Maybury. Really, he felt irritated, but his firm had trained him never to display irritation outside the family circle. Faulkner went quietly forward on his round of the room, speaking to perhaps one person in 3 at the long central table. To some of the people, Faulkner was speaking for quite a period of time, while, as Maybury noticed, those seated next to them, previously saying little in most cases, now said nothing at all, but confined themselves entirely to eating. Some of the people at the long table were not merely elderly, but positively senile. drooling, watery-eyed, and almost hairless, but even they seemed to be eating away with the best. Faulkner was proceeding so slowly, showing so much professional consideration, that he had not yet reached the lady who sat by herself parallel with Mabry, on the other side of the room. Black hair reached her shoulders, and she wore what appeared to be a silk evening dress. She must, he was sure, have been beautiful. Indeed, in a way, still was. "Eat up, sir, you've hardly started." His tormentor had quietly returned to him. "I've had enough. I'm sorry, it's very good, but I've had enough." That's not necessarily for each of us to say, is it? "I want no more to eat of any kind. Please take all this away and bring me a black coffee. When the time comes, if you like, I don't mind waiting." The woman did the last thing Mabry could have expected her to do. She picked up his laden plate and, with force, dashed it on the floor. Even then the plate itself did not break, but gravy and vegetables and rich stuffing spread across the thick patterned wall-to-wall carpet. Complete, in place of comparative silence, followed in the whole room. "Mr. Mabry," Faulkner continued, "I entirely understand your difficulty. There is naturally no obligation to partake of anything you do not wish. I'm only sorry for what has happened. It must seem like very poor service on our part. Perhaps you would prefer to go into our lounge. Would you care simply for some coffee?" "Yes," said Mabry, concentrating upon the essential. "Could I possibly have a pot of it?" He had to step with care over the mess on the floor, looking downwards. As he did so, he saw something most curious. A central rail ran the length of the long table, a few inches above the floor. To this rail, one of the male guests was attached by a fetter round his left ankle. Much to his surprise, it was Mulligan who brought him the coffee. It was a single cup, not a pot. While Mabry was trying to make the most of his meagre coffee, the tragic lady from the other side of the room appeared. She sat not at the other end of the sofa, but at the centre of it. She wore complicated, oriental-looking earrings with pink, translucent stones and silver shoes. Her perfume was heavy and distinctive. "My name is Cecile Silimena," she said. "How do you do? I'm supposed to be related to the composer Chaminade." "How do you do?" said Mabry. "My name is Lucas Mabry, and my only important relation is Solway Short. In fact, he's my cousin." "Who is that gentleman you mentioned?" she asked. "Solway Short, the racing motorist. You must have seen him on the television." "I do not watch the television." "Quite right. It's almost entirely a waste of time." "If you do not wish to waste time, why are you at the hospice?" "I'm here for dinner. I'm just passing through." "Oh, you were going then?" Mabry hesitated. She was attractive, and for the moment he did not wish to go. "I suppose so, when I've paid my bill and found out where I can get some petrol. As a matter of fact, I'm lost. Most of us here are lost." "Why here? What makes you come here?" "We come for the food, and the peace, and the warmth, and the rest." "I'm not sure I quite fit in," said Mabry, and then he added, "I shouldn't have thought that you did either." "Oh, but I do." "Whatever makes you think not?" She seemed quite anxious about it, so that Mabry supposed he'd taken the wrong line. "To start with, more beautiful. You are very beautiful," he said. "That's kind of you to say." Unexpectedly, she stretched out the short distance between them and took his hand. "What did you say your name was?" "Lucas Mabry." "Do people call you Luke?" "No, I dislike it. I'm not a Luke sort of person." "But your wife can't call you Lucas." "I'm afraid she does." It was a fishing question he could have done without. "This is a curious place," said Mabry, giving her hand a squeeze. "I could not live without the hospice," she replied. "Life would be impossible otherwise." She twisted round until her legs were extended the length of the sofa. Her perfume wafted upwards. Then suddenly it seemed that everyone was in the room at once, and this time all talking and fussing. She sat herself up, and with her lips close to his ear said, "Come to me later. Number 23. Faulkner had appeared. "To bed all," he cried genially. No one moved much, but no one spoke either. "To bed all of you," said Faulkner again, this time in a tone which might almost be described as roguish. Mabry was alone with Faulkner. "Before I ask for my bill," said Mabry, "I wonder if you could tell me where I might possibly find some petrol at this hour. There's nothing open at night within 20 miles. All I can suggest is that I siphon some petrol from the tank of our own vehicle." The lad, Vincent, reappeared, still looking pink. "No trouble at all, Mr. Mabry," said Faulkner. "Vincent here can do it easily, or another member of my staff." "Vincent," directed Faulkner, Don't bolt and padlock the front door yet. Mr. Mabry intends to leave us. Very good, said Vincent gruffly. Where it had been excessively hot within, it duly proved to be excessively cold without. The floodlight had been turned off, the moon had gone in, and all the stars had apparently gone with it. Still, the distance to the car was not great. Mabry soon found it in the thick darkness, with Faulkner coming quietly step by step behind him. Mabry had already turned on the headlights and was pushing at the starter, which seemed obdurate. It was not he thought there was anything wrong with it, but rather there was something wrong with him. The sensation was exactly like a nightmare. I wish I could be of some help, remarked Faulkner. Mabry was irritated again. He felt as if he was going mad. Perhaps Cromie could be of assistance, said Faulkner. Cromie has been with us quite a long time and is a wizard with any mechanical problem. Faulkner stepped out of the car and disappeared into the house, shutting the front door behind him, lest the cold air enter. In the end, the front door reopened, and Faulkner re-emerged. He still wore no coat over his dinner suit, and seemed to ignore the cold. Faulkner was followed by a burly but shapeless and shambling figure. Cromie will soon put things to rights, said Faulkner, opening the door of the car. Won't you, Cromie? It was much as one speaks to a friendly retriever. But there was little, Mabry felt, that was friendly about Cromie. Mabry could not acknowledge that for some degrading reason he was unable to operate the starter, and so had to claim there was something wrong with it. He was unable not to see Cromie's huge, badly misshapen yellow hands as he tugged with both of them at the knob, forcing it in and out with such violence that Mabry cried out, "Less force! You'll wreck it!" "Careful, Cromie," said Faulkner. "Most of Cromie's work is on a big scale," he explained to Mabry. But violence proved effective, as so often. Within seconds, the car engine was humming away. Cromie duly extricated himself and shambled off into the darkness. "Now," said Mabry, brisking up as the engine purred, "where do we go for the petrol?" There was the slightest of pauses. Then Faulkner spoke. "Mr. Mabry, I have remembered something. It's not petrol that we have in our tank. It is, of course, diesel oil. I must apologise for such a stupid mistake." Mabry was not merely irritated, not merely scared. He was infuriated. With rage and confusion, he found it impossible to speak at all. "I am extremely sorry, Mr. Mabry. Would you permit me to make some amends by inviting you to spend the night with us free of charge, except perhaps for the dinner?" "Thank you," he said, less than graciously. "We shall try to make you comfortable," said Faulkner. "I have no luggage of any kind," remarked Mabry, still very much on the defensive. "That may solve itself," said Faulkner, smoothing his dinner jacket. "There's something I ought to explain, but will you first excuse me a moment?" Faulkner returned. "There's something I ought to explain," he said again. "We have no single rooms, partly because many of our visitors prefer not to be alone at night. The best we can do for you in your emergency, Mr. Mabry, is to offer you the share of a room with another guest. It is a large room, and there are 2 beds. Mr. Bannard will be glad of your company, I am certain, and you will be quite safe with him. I've just sent a message up asking if he can possibly come down so that I can introduce you." "I should like to telephone my wife, if I may," Mabry said. Angela had been steadily on his mind for some time. "I fear that's impossible, Mr. Mabry," replied Faulkner. "I'm so sorry." "How can it be impossible? Most of our guests are regulars, and the last thing they come for is to hear a telephone ringing the whole time and all the strain it involves." "I'm sorry," said Mabry, "but I simply must telephone my wife. She'll be out of her mind with worry." "I shouldn't think so, Mr. Mabry," said Faulkner, smiling. "Concerned, we must hope, but not quite out of her mind." Mabry could have hit him, but at that moment a stranger entered. "Ah, Mr. Bannard," said Faulkner, and introduced them. "You won't mind, Mr. Bannard, if Mr. Mabry shares your room?" Bannard was a slender, bony little man. He was bald with a rim of curly red hair. "I should be delighted to share my room with anyone," replied Bannard. "I'm lonely by myself." "Splendid," said Faulkner coolly. "Perhaps you'll lead Mr. Mabry upstairs and lend him some pyjamas. You must remember he is a stranger to us and doesn't yet know all our ways." "Delighted, delighted," exclaimed Bannard. "Well then," said Faulkner, "is there anything else you would like, Mr. Mabry, before you go upstairs?" "Only a telephone," rejoined Mabry, still recalcitrant. "Anything you would like that we are in a position to provide, Mr. Mabry." "There is no telephone here," put in Bannard, whose voice was noticeably high, even squeaky. "In that case, nothing," said Mabry. "But I don't know what my wife will do with herself." "None of us knows that," said Bannard superfluously, and cackled for a second. Mabry was almost surprised to discover, as he followed Bannard upstairs, that it seemed a perfectly normal hotel, though overheated and decorated over heavily. "Not too much noise," said Bannard. "We have some very light sleepers amongst us." The corridors were down to half illumination and distinctly sinister. Mabry crept foolishly along and almost stole into Bannard's room. It was a large square room, and the two beds were in exactly opposite corners, somewhat to Mabry's relief. "Night-night, then. Best thing is to get to sleep quickly." His tone was similar to that which seemed habitual with Faulkner. While balancing his trousers on the hanger, Mabry became aware of the injury to his leg. "What's the matter?" said Bannard. "Hurt yourself, have you?" "It was a damned cat scratched me," replied Mabry. With some difficulty and some pain, he rolled up the tight pyjama leg. It was quite a nasty gash. There was much dried blood. "Don't show it to me," squeaked Bannard. "It's bad for me to see things like that. I'm upset by them." Mabry made no reply, but simply rolled down his pyjama leg. Bannard, however, was still sitting up in bed. He was looking pale. "I come here to forget things like that," he said. "We all do." His voice was shaking. "Shall I turn the light out?" inquired Mabry. "I don't usually do that," said Bannard. "It can make things difficult. But there's you to be considered too." "All right," said Bannard. "If you wish, turn it out. Tonight, anyway." "I'm only here for one night," said Mabry, more to the darkness than to Bannard. "You'll be on your own again tomorrow." It was completely dark. It was completely silent. It was far too hot. It was not a promising recipe for slumber. In the end, he thought he could detect Bannard's breathing far, far away. Half a lifetime passed. There could be no doubt now that Bannard was both still in the room and also awake. Perceptibly, he was on the move. Mabry's body contracted with speculation as to whether Bannard, in the total blackness, was making towards his corner. Mabry felt he was only half his normal size. Bannard edged and groped interminably. Mabry could hardly hear him moving at all, though it was a gamble whether this was consideration or menace. Mabry would hardly have been surprised if the next event had been hands on his throat. In fact, the next event was Bannard reaching the door and opening it with vast delicacy and slowness. But Mabry did not feel fully reassured as he rigidly watched the column of dim light from the passage slowly widen and then slowly narrow until it vanished with the faint click of the handle. Then, from somewhere within the house, came a shattering, ear-piercing scream. And then another. And another. It was impossible to tell whether the din came from near or far, still less whether it was female or male. It was shattering to listen to, especially in the enclosed, hot, total darkness. The screaming went on until Mabry had to clutch at himself, not to scream in response. The screaming stopped on a ghoulish gurgle, perhaps as if the sufferer had vomited immensely and then passed out, or in mercy, passed away altogether. Then Bannard was creeping back into the room. Mabry's ears had picked up no faint sound of a step in the passage. There had been no noise either of a turned key. He shut the door with extraordinary skill, and Mabry could just, though only just, hear him slithering into his bed. Still, there was one unmistakable development. At Bannard's return, the dark room had filled with perfume. The perfume favoured by the lady who had been so charming to Mabry in the lounge. Mabry had every reason to be at least irritated by everything that was happening, but instead, he soon fell asleep himself. Then he was awake again, and Bannard was standing there by his bed. Was the man standing there really Bannard? Bannard had a fringe of red hair, whereas this man's fringe was quite grey. There was also a different expression and general look. "I was just wondering if you'd care to talk for a bit," said Bannard. "What was all that screaming?" inquired Mabry. "I didn't hear anything," said Bannard. "I suppose I slept through it, but I can imagine." We soon learned to take no notice. He took a step nearer and bent slightly over Mabry's face. His pyjamas really reeked of perfume. "Perhaps we could talk for just 5 or 10 minutes more," said Mabry, "and then I should like to get to sleep again, if you'll excuse me. I ought to explain that I slept very little last night owing to my wife's illness." "Is your wife pretty?" said Bannard. "Of course she is," said Mabry. "Tell us about it," said Bannard. "Tell us exactly what it's like to be a married man. Has it changed your whole life?" "Not exactly. In any case, I married years ago." "Love's old sweet song still sings to you?" "Time's up for me," said Mabry. "Do you mind if we go to sleep again?" Bannard rose at once to his feet. Could the absurd conversation with Bannard have been a dream? Certainly what happened next was a dream, for there was Angela in her nightdress with her hands on her poor head, crying out, "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" Mabry could not but comply, and in Angela's place there was the boy Vincent, with early morning tea for him. Down in the lounge, there they all were, with Faulkner presiding, undefinably but genially. Universal expectation was detectable. Of breakfast, Mabry assumed. Bannard was simply lost in the throng. Cecile he could not see, but he made a point of not looking very hard. Faulkner crossed to him at once. "I can promise you a good breakfast, Mr. Mabry," he said confidentially. "Lentils, fresh fish, rump steak, apple pie made by ourselves, with lots and lots of cream." "I mustn't stay for it," said Mabry. "I simply mustn't. I have my living to earn. I must go at once." He was quite prepared to walk a couple of miles. Indeed, all set for it. A faint shadow passed over Faulkner's face, but he merely said in a low voice, "You can respect a confidence?" "Yes," said Mabry steadily. "There was an incident here last night. A death. We do not talk about such things. Our guests do not expect it." "I am sorry," said Mabry. "Such things still upset me," said Faulkner. "Nonetheless, I must not think about that. My immediate task is to dispose of the body, while the guests are preoccupied, to spare them all knowledge, all pain." "How's that to be done?" inquired Mabry. "In the usual manner, Mr. Mabry. The hearse is drawing up outside. Where you are concerned, the point is this. If you wish for what in other circumstances I could call a lift, I could arrange for you to join the vehicle. It seems the best solution, don't you think, Mr. Mabry?" A coffin was already coming down the stairs, borne on the shoulders of 4 men in black, with Vincent in his white jacket coming first. "I agree," said Mabry. "Perhaps you would let me know of my bill for dinner." "I shall waive that too, Mr. Mabry, in the present circumstances. We have a duty to hasten. I shall simply say how glad we have been to have you with us." He held out his hand. "Goodbye, Mr. Mabry." Mabry was compelled to travel with the coffin itself, because there was not room for him on the front seat, where a director of the firm, a corpulent man, had to be accommodated with the driver. Mabry alighted unobtrusively when a bus stop was reached. One of the undertaker's men said he should not have to wait long.